Do you know why a sandwich is called a sandwich? Well, the origins aren't as clear as they seem, but I think I've come up with a really good explanation that, to my knowledge, hasn't been put out there yet. And I'm going to let you know about that on today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet. Plus, we'll ask the cards for a reality sandwich of advice for our work and lives. I don't know what I've opened myself up for there with the cards, but I have a feeling it's probably going to be passions or for hobbies. I'm John Paulus. You're listening to Life's Potluck Buffet only on YouTube. If you've been enjoying Life's Potluck Buffet, please subscribe. If you subscribed already, thank you so much. And if you use a Brave browser, as I do, you can contribute basic attention tokens to Life's Potluck Buffet with John Paulus on YouTube through the Brave browser. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening. I want to start with 2004, about 300 years after the fourth Earl of Sandwich was born. And the reason I say that is because something amazing happened. Because the Earl of Sandwich is a restaurant franchise based in Florida in the United States. And the founders of it are the 11th Earl of Sandwich. So I guess 300 years equals 7 Earls. That's some sort of math equation. So that's the 11th Earl of Sandwich, the Earl of Sandwich's son, Orlando Montague, and someone named Robert Earl, which is, I think, an aptronym. Is that so? Did that set Robert Earl up for going into business with the Earl of Sandwich? Maybe that's why. Anyway, Robert Earl was the person who started Planet Hollywood, if you're familiar with that chain. And what I'm talking about, Earl of Sandwich, is a sandwich restaurant that is, well, parlaying the fame of the fourth Earl of Sandwich and his supposed creation of the sandwich. Now, let's just get this out of the way right now. The fourth Earl of Sandwich did not invent the idea of a sandwich. I mean, a piece of meat with between two pieces of bread product, yeah, it's going to be pretty hard to find an inventor for that. So let's just put that aside for now. But I'm pretty sure that the fourth Earl of Sandwich is the person to look to for why, in the English language, a piece of meat between two pieces of bread is called a sandwich. And it has I have a really good explanation for it that I don't think that anybody has come up with before. Maybe they have. If you have, please mention in the comments and give me a link to where you mention it, because I think I have the reason. I'm very excited about it. Okay, so, well, let's go back into history. Okay, we're back. Now we're in 1718, and somewhere in the southern part of England, the fourth Earl of Sandwich is born. I don't think they were born the fourth Earl of Sandwich, because otherwise the third Earl of Sandwich would have to have been dead already, and they were still alive. So okay, so they were you get the idea. The third Earl of Sandwich, Edward Montague, would live for about 10 more years after the birth of the fourth Earl of Sandwich, John Montague. Now, here's how the story goes. There was a travel guide written about London in the 1770s that talks about a gambling situation where a minister of the state is gambling and likes to always have these, I'll call them sandwiches, but because because the author of that particular guide doesn't call them sandwiches, but says that they are named after a certain minister of state who liked gambling and liked to, when playing cards, have someone make him what we would call a sandwich, with a piece of cold meat between two pieces of bread. And the stories around this, in the stories around this that I've read, it's always a piece of salt beef. Now, I think that's a clue to our mystery. Oh, and speaking of mysteries, if you'll recall from episode 308, Island Steel, I was coming up with a treatment for a show that is about a Trinidadian steel pan percussion band leader who's also a plainclothes detective in the Trinidad the police force, and they have a friend who's a Honolulu police officer who plays the steel guitar, and the friend is visiting, and they play shows together, and crimes happen. They use their kind of musical shows to, infiltrate and investigate shady dealings and so forth. I wanted to add to that I think there needs to be a love interest, and there needs to be some sort of romance, and I think that's in the form of a calypso singer who, I think the calypso singer and the Honolulu police person, they eventually fall in love, or maybe, I think that's how it works. And so that's what I think is going to bring us all over to the Hawaiian Islands for the second season. So I just want to put that in there. So I figured out a kind of link between the first two seasons. But here's why I bring that up, is that Captain Cook, you ever hear that name? Well, Captain Cook actually decided to name the Hawaiian Islands the Sandwich Islands in honor of the 4th Earl of Sandwich, who was a very big patron of Captain Cook's sailing expeditions and so forth. And thankfully, the name Sandwich Islands never really caught on, thank goodness, because, that's not right. Okay, so not only was the 4th Earl of Sandwich a big supporter of Captain Cook and his ships, but he was actually the First Lord of the Admiralty. So he was in charge of basically the provisions for, all the ships, the British Navy. And I think this is where the sandwich name comes in. I think it has to do with provisioning the British Navy. Oh, well, what do I mean? Well, here's what I mean. A standard provision on naval ships from the 17th century to, hundreds of years later were things like salted beef to be preserved, so cold salted beef, and what in American English is called hardtack, or a kind of hard bread rusks, I think you might also call them, that were also given to sailors on a daily basis. And so think about it now. Think about the sandwich as becoming a nickname for Navy-style provisions of bread and salted cold beef that are eaten together. And then all of a sudden, it starts to make a lot of sense why a sandwich might come from the 4th Earl of Sandwich, but because he was provisioning the Navy, and those provisions were stereotypically cold salted beef and bread, hard bread. And see, in all the versions of the stories, there's always, and I think this is another clue, the Earl of Sandwich is always eating these sandwiches on toasted bread. So you see, it replicates that hard bread that is used on naval ships and sailing ships. And always in the story, there's always this kind of salt beef, cold beef idea, because that's what they're talking about there, is probably a salt beef. And there are actually a few stories that actually call it, say, a piece of salt beef, which in American English we call that corned beef. I think that's what the same thing we're talking about called corned beef, with but that's what we're talking about here, which is fitting because there are plenty of corned beef sandwiches that in the world, and that's a really standard kind of sandwich. And fitting, it may have been the first sandwich of British naval type, so to speak. And I think that's where the name sandwich actually comes from, because we're talking about, the Lord of the Admiralty, Earl of Sandwich, and you say, oh, well, what are these naval provisions? Oh, well, these are sandwiches provisions, or we're going to call these a sandwich because this is what the Earl of Sandwich's office provides us. I also like to imagine that exasperated sailors were like, oh, what do we got on board? And they say, oh, just sandwiches, that's all. Oh, sandwiches again. So I can see that really happening. I see it being, I think it's likely, but we'll never know. The earliest mention of it is by Edward Gibbon, who wrote The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. That's what he's famous for as being a historian. But he also recounts a meal at or activities at the dining club called the Cocoa Tree on St. James's Street in London. And he talks about the people in there eating cold beef or sandwiches. And so I'm starting to really think that this whole Navy connection and salted beef and hard bread have something to do with why we call a sandwich a sandwich. All right, now let's have that reality sandwich. I will say that on the bottom of the deck is Passions Are for Hobbies. Why? Because when I picked up the deck, it was on the bottom of the deck. I don't know why. That wasn't the last card, so I don't know how it got there. But I have a feeling I know. But well, let's hope it doesn't appear again. And I've just probably resigned myself to having it appear. Okay, so we'll do our ritual shuffle. Yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles. Cards. Give us a reality sandwich. Uh-oh. Everything just fell on the floor. One moment, please. All right. So here's today's card. Card 16. Turn your greatest weakness into your greatest strength. The guy who wrote Robert's Rules of Order, the rules by which most formal meetings are run in the United States, did so because he didn't know how to run a meeting at church. So find some area in which you know you are deficient or you feel like you don't know what you're doing and become proficient in it. This will be a source of flourishing and pride for you. So if it helps, fill in this blank. I am really bad at blank. I'm apparently really bad at shuffling cards. So I'm going to become proficient at that. Hopefully by the next episode of Life's Potluck Buffet, which will be tomorrow. So I'll see you then.